Hello, this is an overview of an incredibly powerful development tool, DevContainer. So, what is DevContainer? DevContainer is a VS Code plugin which offers a solution for creating consistent and isolated development environment using container technology such as Docker. However, it is not limited to Docker alone. You can also use it with Kubernetes. Essentially, what it does is eliminates the works on my machine problem and ensures seamless collaboration among team members. How does it do that? Firstly, it provides consistency. When all developers on the project use the same dev container, it ensures that everyone is working with identical tools, dependencies, and configuration. This consistency minimizes the chance of environment related bug and drastically reduces the time spent on debugging and troubleshooting. Secondly, with fully containerized development environment, it provides total isolation from underlying host and host related dependencies, enabling the complete isolation of the project. Thirdly, Dev Container enables us to create and maintain our development environment as a code. The entire setup is defined in a simple configuration file. This means that not only we can easily share our development environment with others, but also version control it with our source code. Last but not least, Dev Container promotes better collaboration. No more are wasted on setting up environments, no more inconsistencies among the team members, and no more compatibility issues. Dev Container ensures that everyone is on the same page. As we dive deeper into the world of Dev Container, we will explore how to set up and customize Dev Container, understand the essential components of Dev Container, and learn some of the best practices to enhance our development workflow with the Hello Dev Container project. This concludes our overview session, and I'll see you next in the prerequisite. In this session, I'll brief you through the prerequisite and install them. You can sure skip the installation part if you know how to do so. What we need is VS Code IDE, Dev Container extension, Docker, GitHub account, that is if you are going to push code to GitHub repository, SSH client if you are going to use SSH connection to push and pull the code from the GitHub. Now let's go ahead and do some work. As you can see, I have already logged into Ubuntu, and this is where I'm going to install our prerequisite. So the first thing first, we're going to install the VS Code itself. So let's go ahead, open the browser and search for VS Code, download Ubuntu. And I'm interested in the second link here, which is download Visual Studio Code. I'm going to download the Debian package, and there we go, it's almost there. There we go. Now let's go ahead, open terminal, sudo dpackage -i download code. This is going to install the version 1.82, which is a latest version as of now. You might have a different version depending upon when in the future you are going to install the VS Code. There we go, VS Code is installed. So let's go ahead, open VS Code. It should ask for authentication. Yes, I have it. Now maximize this window. I am also going to add this to my favorite, so next time when I start my Ubuntu, I have it on the side panel here. Now let's go ahead and install extension. The extension that we are interested in is called Dev Container, and the first extension is the one that we are interested in. I've already clicked on install, and it should be installed and ready to use shortly. There we will go, we have it. But this extension very much depends upon the Docker as well. So let's go back to the browser and search for install Docker on Ubuntu. Here I'm interested in the first link called install Docker engine. Let's look at the prerequisite. It says it needs one of the OS listed here, and I'm using Ubuntu 22.04. So that is met. Uninstalled old version. It's a fresh installation of the Ubuntu, so we don't really need to uninstall anything. And it gives few options for installation methods. I'm just going to stick to using apt repository. Let's copy this script, paste it in our terminal. What it basically does is install all the prerequisites and adds a apt source for the Docker itself. Be aware, this is not installing Docker, this is simply adding the apt source for the Docker. So let's go ahead and look at the steps 2. Now this is where we are installing Docker. Just copy the script. I'm going to paste it. However, instead of just going ahead, I'm going to add Docker Compose as well, because I know I'm going to use it. This should shortly install everything that we need. Yeah, we have it. But can we access Docker? Let's say that with Docker ps-a. No, we don't have permission. This is because the user we have logged in with doesn't have access to the Docker group. So let's go ahead and add our user with sudo user mode append small a append group Docker to our user. Let's say now it hasn't added our user to the Docker group yet. For it to work, you need to log off and log in. However, there is another way, and we are just going to do that. New group hyphen Docker, and if you check this time, the Docker group is added. So let's go ahead and try the command again. Docker ps-a. It works. We don't have any problem. Let's just check while we are in the terminal if we have SSH client installed. So I'm going to check that with command where is SSH. There we go. We have SSH client installed. I also need to have git. So let's go ahead and check it again with where is git. There we go. Git is also installed. With that, we have all the prerequisites already set. I'll see you next in the project information session. Here I'm going to brief you about the project and do some initial setup. I'm familiar with Python, Ruby, and Shell script more than any other language when it comes to programming. Python being one of the more popular one, I have chosen Python project as an example to set up DevContainer. We'll be writing a very small Python program which will fetch name from the database and print it on the screen. Yet it will expose you to some of the powerful features of DevContainer. I have already created a GitHub repository called Hello DevContainer, which will at the moment contains only a license file. Let's go ahead and copy the link to clone GitHub repository. I have also logged into my machine already, and I'm going to clone the repository with git clone and paste the SSH link that we copied. Enter. It's cloning. Let's go to the directory hello DevContainer, and as expected, it contains the only license file in here. And that concludes our project information session. I'll see you next in the first DevContainer config. In this session, we are going to create our very first DevContainer config. Basically, there are two ways in which you can create a DevContainer config file. One is to create .devcontainer JSON file within the project root, and another way is to create .devcontainer directory and have a DevContainer JSON file within that directory. They both have their own advantage and disadvantages. What I'm going to do is go with the .dev container directory, so we can keep all the assets related to dev container separate. And in this session, we are going to keep it very simple. I'm just going to define the Python image that we want to use along with this container and mount our workspace directory in the container. So let's go ahead and start some work. I have already logged into my development machine and have VS Code open with the Hello Dev container repository. So as discussed, what I'll be doing is creating a .dev container directory. Wait a minute, before that, let me go ahead and create a new branch where I will have all my new development work stored. Yeah, there we go. Now let me go ahead and create .dev container directory. This is where I'll be keeping all the assets related to dev container. And now we'll create a file called dev container.json, which is our main configuration file. To start with, I'm going to have one single parameter in there called image and assign it value Python. Sorry, my bad. It's Python colon 3.11. What it will do is go ahead and pull the Docker image for Python with the tag 3.11. Now let's go ahead and reload our window, and there we go. We have a pop-up which suggests we should open this in the container now that we have the dev container configuration. So I'll go ahead and just do that. It's starting container, and yeah, it has already built container for us and mounted directory workspace, rather I should call it, it being a VS Code. So it has mounted the workspace for us in the dev container. And that is all for this session. In the next session, we'll be adding a lot more configuration and customizing our development environment. So I'll see you in the next session. In this session, we are going to set up development environment, which include auto installation of Python packages, which we need for our example application. Auto install VS Code extension and settings. For example, we can have a Python coding standard extension with settings specific to organization. And when it's part of dev container configuration, it is available to anyone joining the team. We'll also look at setting up tasks to enhance development experience, and finally, look at some best practices for VS Code settings. So let's go ahead and start setting up our development environment. I've already logged into my development machine and have Hello Dev container repository open here. We said this is the Python environment, which would use pytest and Postgres database. Way to install those modules is to run pip command and putting those modules in the requirements.txt. And if you noticed, I've already created requirements.txt with the modules here. A pytest is of course for testing, Flask is a web application, and Psycho Postgres 2 is a library to communicate with the Postgres in the backend. How do we ensure that these packages are installed every time we run the dev container is with the simple parameter called OnCreate. So OnCreate command to say pip install requirements dot txt and save this file and rebuild container. When it rebuilds, it will start to install the packages for us, which we need to develop our application. Um, PYENV or virtually is what we should be using ideally instead of directly using the packages like this and running it as a root user. But for now, we're going to ignore this error and it's a dev container, so it doesn't really matter. Um, let's go ahead and see if it has installed our packages actually. For that, we'll go open new terminal and I'll use pip free, sorry, wrong key, pip freeze. And there we go. We have Psycho Postgres 2, pytest, and Flask. Next thing we are going to do is add extensions. Extensions help us enhance development experience by helping us with the tasks such as code formatting, preview of the file, code lint, syntax highlights, and so on. We'll be adding some of my favorite extension, which is used for almost every Python project, starting with code spell check. So if you haven't already opened extension on the sidebar, open it and go to search and type code spell checker. And the first one is the what I want to install. Now I could go ahead and just install it. However, if I do that, next time when my container rebuilds, I'll have to go through the process of installing extensions again, which is exactly what we want to avoid. And to fix that situation, all we have to do is to go to settings and add to DevContainer. What it does is it adds a configuration in DevContainer to add extension automatically next time when it rebuilds. So let's go ahead and rebuild our container at this point. Of course, it will start with installing our Python modules, and once Python modules are there, we should see code spell check module. There we go, it has already done it. I'm going to add a few more extensions here. The next one in queue for me is prettier. Prettier code format. I'm going to do same thing, settings, add to DevContainer. This time I'm not going to rebuild it immediately because I have a few more extensions to add, some related to Git now, starting with Git lens. It provides good insight of who made changes on which line and when. And Git diff, that is another useful extension to look at the Git diff. Git ignore, what it does, it helps us add git ignore file depending upon the project. It just saves a lot of typing for us. And now some Python related extension. So Python extension from Microsoft, Python black formatter, so black formatter and black, add it to container. Then I need py lens, which provides as a Python language servers, kind of act as a coding standard. Py lint, and this is to lint our code as per Python standard, again part of coding standard. Added there, and most of the GitHub repository would include readme.md or readme.srd. I'm just going to use md, so let's add markdown lint and markdown preview to our DevContainer. We also know we are going to use PostgreSQL, so let's add SQL tools to help us connect to the database when we really need to. So I'm going to use SQL tools. However, this is not enough. We also need to add SQL tool Postgres driver, and there we go. That is all we need. Let's look at the DevContainer JSON. It contains all the extension that we need for our development environment. So at this stage I'm going to do Ctrl+Shift+P, and I can reload window, or I can say rebuild container without cache, and it will straight away go into rebuilding container. Of course, as always, it will install the Python packages first, and then it will start installing our extensions. And yeah, there we go, we have our all extension installed. The next thing what we are going to do is add settings. Let's start with the setting, and once again, to make it persistent, we are going to add our settings to DevContainer configuration file, which is devcontainer.json. So let's start working on this. So the parameter that we are going to add is called settings itself. The first thing, I'm going to make changes to my editor. I want to change default formatter for my editor and make it prettier. Next thing I want to change is behavior of editor when to format on paste. I want to leave it false. However, I want to do format on save, so I'll make it true instead. Another thing I want to do is editor.tab completion and enable it. It's quite helpful when you can just tab through your code. Another thing I want is file related file.trim. Where is it? Trim, yeah, trim trailing white spaces, make it true. And we want to next go ahead and make changes to the spell checker. The reason is I'm going to use English Great Britain dictionary instead of the default English US. So let's see how to make that. C as spell dot language, and instead of English and GB, and that's all. We are done with the spell checker setting. Now let's go ahead and add some Python specific config, which basically means we want to editor to behave differently when it is Python file. So yes, first thing I want to do is change default formatter for the Python. Default formatter for Python should be black formatter. I also want to change code action on save behavior here. What I want to do is sort imports to true. And now I want to add some more Python related settings such as isort args and specify profile. We are using black formatter, so it should be black here. Next thing is let's set Python language server to pylens. And another thing I want to do is some Python testing related configuration. So let's go ahead, Python testing dot py test enable. I want to make it true. I also want to pass argument to my py test actually, so that's Python testing dot py test args. The simple args that I want to pass here is workspace root, which means run py test within the root of the project itself instead of looking for tests in another directory such as test. You can also do this configuration, and ideally you should be doing this configuration in either pytest.ini, or you should be using project toml file, but we are not doing the Python development here. We are looking at DevContainer, so I'll just go ahead with this. And one more thing that I like to do is disable unit testing explicitly. Not that we have to, but it's just something I want to make sure is disabled. And now let's go ahead, rebuild our container. As usual, it will take some time, and once container is built, we are going to write our test application and see how it behaves. Let's go ahead and start writing our application now. It's a Flask app, so it expects file name to be app.py by default, and that's what we are going to use, app.py. Now let's go ahead and from Flask import Flask. I'm going to call my app simple app and pass name as a parameter. And now let's go ahead and define the function which will send response to our root or index page. Simple app dot root to slash which indicates index page of the site. Now I'll define function, say my name, and it will say return hello there. Okay, and let's go ahead and write our main function. What happens when the script is actually executed? So if name is equal to main, then I want to run my simple app with host as 0.0.0.0, and I'll choose port to be 8000. Let's open the terminal and give it a go. Flask run. Okay, it did ask us to open it in the browser, so let's go ahead, open it. Yeah, hello there, which is all good. But if you notice, we are having some blue line, so it doesn't like the way we have named our function, which is part of the py lens, and it is kind of in a way asking us, please change the name and try to follow the naming standard. I'm going to leave it as it is because this is an example app and I want it to scream that this is wrong. And same way here, it is saying, yeah, document string is missing. If I put document string, this will go away. And now let's write the test. I'm going to call it app test.py. So now if we look at actually the test lab here, it still doesn't show anything because there is no test written yet. So let's go ahead and write our first test where we will test our say my name function. So import app, which is app.py, test say my name, and I'm going to say assert say app dot say my name returns hello there. So it doesn't like unexpected. Yeah, okay, it does. So it has warned of unexpected indentation because we missed to put define function here. And now if I run, go back to testing, and there we go, we have our test here. I'll just execute it, and nice, it's working. Now let's go ahead and test if it actually gives this response when we send the request. It's quite easy to do that. So let's go define test main. I'm calling it main because that's the name of the function, underscore main. Assert, or not assert, I need to say, yeah, with app dot symbol app dot test client, and it's a function that I need to import as test client. Let's go ahead and say test assert test client dot response is equal to, yeah, that's what I want to say. Response is equal to test client dot get, and then assert response dot status code. It should be 200. Oops, not 200. And next thing I want to assert is hello there is in response data. And yeah, it has already recognized our next test, and I can just go ahead and run it. That passed. Now let's go ahead and execute all the tests. And there we go, that's all. So we have our test and our app running. If you haven't noticed already, we have hard-coded value for host and port here. Let's go ahead and fix it, because DevContainer does provide us a way to pass environment variable. So I'm going to add a new parameter called remote env, and then I'm going to call my first environment variable app host, which should be 0.0.0.0, and next parameter I want to pass there is app port, which should be 8000. It might give you warning that it is number, but you can go ahead, ignore it, and rebuild container. It will take a little bit to rebuild container, not ages, it just probably takes about 30 seconds. And once container is rebuilt, we can go ahead, open new terminal and see if our environment variables are there already. Host name, no, not host name, app host and app port. Yeah, both of them are there. So let's go ahead and change our app. I'm going to import OS so we can read our environment variable. And if you notice on save, it did format and sort our imports. So let's go ahead and call get variable app host is equal to os dot get environment, and we're calling it app host. However, if app host is not specified, you can go and define default, but I don't want to. Now we're going to do exactly same thing for app port os.get environment app port, and let's see. Let's go ahead, execute our tests, and all of them are running successful. That is because we still haven't changed it here. I was too quick to jump on the conclusion. So here app host and port, app port, save it, and now run it again, and tests are still passing, meaning we have now our app host and app port coming in as an environment variable, which is more flexible. What we have done so far is have set up very simple Python development environment in DevContainer. However, it is never that simple when it comes to real project, and almost always there is at least database, if nothing more. So how can we go about it? There are more than one way to do this. My preferred method is to use Docker Compose file along with devcontainer.json. So let's go ahead and do that. So first thing, I'm going to add compose file here. Make sure your compose file is within .devcontainer directory. Otherwise, it might not work for you. And I'm going to split the screen just to make my job a little more easy. Services, I'm going to call my service app container. The image I'm going to use is same as the image that we have defined here in DevContainer. So that will be Python 3.11. Host name should be app container. Standard in open true, tty true. So standard in and tty true, what it does is it makes terminal available to you in a nutshell. We also want to have an environment file, and we'll be moving our environment variables app host and app port to this file. I'm going to call this file app, not aoo, app dot environment. Now let's go ahead and create new file called app.environment, and as I mentioned, app host 0.0.0.0, app port 8000, same as what we have in dev container. Now let's go ahead and make configuration changes to dev container. So first thing we need is docker compose file. The file name here is compose.yaml. We also need to tell which service we want to start, and the service is app container. Next thing I want to add is shutdown action, which is stop compose. Now at this moment, if I try to go ahead and rebuild, it should fail because container is already running. Let me do retry, and then we might see the real problem. So the real problem here is we don't have the mount point defined, so we need to define mount configuration file. Let's go ahead and do that. Mounts, I want to mount my local workspace folder, local space folder, target, it could be anything. I'm going to use vscode / workspace, type bind, and let's define the workspace folder now, which is vscode / workspace, which is same as our target mount. Now try to rebuild container, and it doesn't like it. Let me go ahead and see what's happening. Yeah, I think we have a problem in our compose file. So I was specifying host name, but I put colon here, which is of course syntax error, and it was telling me off about it. So let's save. And now let's try to rebuild our container one more time. Yeah, there we go, it's working. We should see our container in a moment as soon as it is done installing all the packages and extensions. So yeah, let's go ahead and run some test just to make sure it is still working as expected, and it is. So now we have done our simple container, which is just for the app at the moment, but now I'll show you next how easy it is to add another container with the database. So first thing I'm going to do is add database service here in the compose. So I'm going to call my service database container. Image, I'm going to use Postgres version 14.8. I'm going to have a host name, again same as the service name, DB container. We don't need a standard in open or TTY open for this particular container. However, we do need environment variable set in environment file. And I'm going to call this environment file database.env. Now let's create our database env file. What we are going to put here is Postgres user, Postgres database name, authentication method, host name, as well as port. So let's start with the Postgres user, root, Postgres database. I want to call it hello day container, Postgres authentication method. Actually, the variable is called Postgres host authentication method is equal to trust Postgres port. I want to call it 5432, which is default Postgres port anyway. I think that is all that goes in our environment file. There is one more thing that we need to put. Postgres host it's db container. So you can look up all these variables and what they do. If you look for the Postgres Docker container official image, they provide with list of variables and how they'll help you configure your Postgres instance. Now that is done, I also want to add database related environment variable to my application. So it is available to application to use. Uh, let's go and save this file. There's one more thing I want to do. We need to link our database container. And we need to also set dependency. What this does is it will make host name DB container available within app container, and app container would wait for database container to come up. And normally this is helpful. So let's go ahead and rebuild our container. Uh, I know our database container is available now. However, we could not connect to it because we haven't added this connection. So let me go ahead and edit our dev container config to include the database connection details here. So go and add SQL to dot connections. Let's go ahead and add database name to start with. Database name was hello dev container. Okay, next thing we want to add is server. Server is db container. Next we want to add username, which is root. Password is empty. Port is 5432. What else we want to add is yeah, driver. Of course, we need to tell Postgres needs to use Postgres SQL driver. And now let's go ahead and rebuild our container once more. All right, our container is up and running. Let's see if we can connect to database. And yeah, our database connection is established. So now the next thing that we need to do is write our app, or rather rewrite our app a little bit so it connects to the database. We have already got our database container up and running, and we tested that SQL tools could connect to it. So now let's go ahead and make changes to our app and see if app could actually connect to the database. So first thing I'm going to do is import the Postgres client library called psycho2. And next thing I want to do is import get all the variables related to Postgres so we could make connection to the database. First variable I'm interested in is database name itself. Os.get env Postgres db. Then database user os.get env Postgres user. And another one we need is host os.get env Postgres Postgres host. Now that is done, let's create a function called DB and this is where we are going to write actual code, and I'm going to put it in the try and accept uh, block. So try, expect, try DB connection is equal to psycho2 dot connect. And yeah, it will need a bunch of parameter. I'll start with host is equal to database host, user is equal to database user, name, or it is db name. Yeah, db name is equal to db name, and return connection, and accept exception or anything to do with psycho library as error, print error, comma error, return. Let's add the test for our database function. Define test db connection assert app dot db connection. It should be true and not none. So let's run the test. And it's successful. All that worked, though I agree this is very useless app in practice. Yet it demonstrates you can easily integrate exit version of database in development environment, which is very vital. And not just database. You can run web server, message queuing service like RabbitMQ, or anything else that your project may need. And with this, we have reached to conclusion. We've explored the concept of Visual Studio Code's Dev Container and how they provide consistent and isolated development environment in the project. We discussed the advantage of using Dev Container and learned how to create custom Dev Container using a Python project as an example. By utilizing Dev Container, developers can enhance their productivity, collaborate seamlessly, and maintain consistent development environment across different machines and the team members. I've also added a link to get a project at the bottom of this video. And finally, I would like to thank you for watching this and happy coding.